They held her arms down while she screamed. Not strangers, not outlaws passing through, her own brothers. Two men who had eaten at her table, who had slept under the roof their father built, who had watched her bleed and sweat for years to keep that land alive. And they pressed her into the floorboards like she was nothing, like she had never mattered at all. She screamed until her throat tore, and somewhere up in those cold Montana mountains, a man heard her. What happened next would change everything, for Eleanor, for the men who thought they could take what wasn't theirs, and for a solitary trapper who hadn't spoken to another human soul in almost 3 years. If you've ever had something stolen from you by someone who was supposed to love you, this story is going to hit you somewhere deep. Stay with us. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because we tell stories like this every single week, stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Drop a like and leave a comment with your city or country. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to 1883, and to a woman the world was about to seriously underestimate. Eleanor Ashcroft had not slept more than 4 hours in a single stretch for going on 11 months. She knew this because she had started counting, the way a person counts things when the weight of their life gets too heavy to carry all at once, and they need something small and manageable to hold on to. 11 months since her father, Harold Ashcroft, had drawn his last shallow breath in the back bedroom of the ranch house, his weathered hand going cold inside hers before she even understood what was happening. 11 months since she had stood at his grave on the low hill east of the barn, the October wind cutting straight through her wool coat, and thought to herself, "This land is mine now, and I will not let it die." She had meant it, every syllable of it. What she hadn't anticipated was how much the land itself would fight back. The winter that followed Harold's death was the worst anyone in the Bitterroot Valley could remember. 3 of her 7 cattle died in a single week of January freeze. The creek that fed the eastern pasture froze solid and didn't thaw until late March, by which point 2 of her fence lines had been flattened by elk coming down from the high country looking for anything green. She had repaired the fences herself, alone, with hands that cracked and bled in the cold, because the 2 ranch hands Harold had kept on had quit before the new year. One had taken a job at the copper mine outside of Butte. The other had simply not returned after the Christmas holiday, leaving his bunk neat and his wages uncollected, which Eleanor had always thought was a stranger thing than if he'd taken the money and burned the barn on his way out. She had gotten through the winter. Then the spring mud, which turned the road to the ranch into something closer to a river for 6 weeks. Then a dry summer that threatened the vegetable garden she depended on to keep her food stores from depleting entirely. And then the fall had arrived again, golden and cool, and for the first time in almost a year, Eleanor had stood on the porch in the early morning and felt something other than dread. She had felt for just a few weeks like she was winning. That was when her brothers came back. Silas arrived first, on a Tuesday, riding up the main road on a horse Eleanor didn't recognize. A too-fine horse, glossy black, the kind of animal that cost more money than Silas had ever legitimately earned in his life. He came alone, but he came with a smile that Eleanor recognized from childhood, the particular smile Silas wore when he had already decided something and was simply waiting to inform you of his decision. He was 41 years old, 4 years older than Eleanor. He had left the ranch when he was 19, and their father was still strong, left with no explanation and $40 he had quietly removed from the tin Harold kept behind the loose brick in the kitchen. Eleanor had never told her father about the $40. She had always been uncertain whether the omission made her loyal or complicit, and in the years since she had mostly stopped thinking about it. Silas had not written, had not come back when Harold's health began to fail, had not come back when Eleanor sent word twice by courier that their father was dying. He had arrived, finally, 3 days after Harold was in the ground, and he had stood at the grave with his hat in his hands and a look on his face that Eleanor could not entirely read. Not grief exactly, more like someone calculating a sum they weren't sure they'd gotten right. He had stayed 4 days that first visit, long enough to look at the deed which Harold had filed with the county clerk in Millerton 2 years before his death, long enough to ask Eleanor, very casually over supper on the 3rd night, whether she had considered selling, whether she had looked at what the railroad was paying for valley land these days. Eleanor had told him she had not. Silas had nodded slowly, the way he always nodded when he was absorbing information he planned to use against you later, and then he had left the next morning before she was up. She had thought, had let herself believe, that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. Wade showed up 6 weeks later. Wade was 38, a year younger than Eleanor. And where Silas was the kind of man who smiled when he wanted something, Wade was the kind who sulked. He had their mother's eyes, dark brown and deep set, and he used them the way their mother had, to make you feel without a word being said that you had already disappointed him. He came with a saddlebag full of papers, and he sat down at Eleanor's kitchen table without being invited and spread those papers out like he owned the surface they rested on. Most of what he had was nothing. Old letters, a water rights document that Harold had signed over to the county years ago, a surveyor's map from 1871 that showed the original property boundaries before Harold had purchased the eastern meadow from the Tennyson family in 1874. None of it meant what Wade seemed to think it meant, or at least that was what Eleanor told herself, though her stomach had tightened when she looked at the map, and she had spent 2 sleepless nights afterwards searching through her father's files to confirm what she believed she knew. The deed was in her name. Harold had made sure of that. Whatever her brothers thought they could manufacture from old surveys and older letters, the legal fact was simple. The Ashcroft Ranch and all 560 acres of the Bitterroot Valley that came with it belonged to Eleanor. She had told Wade this plainly. Wade had looked at her across the table with those dark eyes and said, "Eleanor, you are a single woman with no husband and no hands and no real understanding of what you're sitting on. This isn't about what the paper says. This is about what makes sense." She had asked him to leave. He had left, but he had taken his papers with him slowly, folding each one with deliberate care, and the slowness of it had frightened her in a way she did not want to examine too closely. That had been 3 weeks ago. The morning they came back together, Eleanor was in the barn. She had been up since before light, the way she always was, her body having long since abandoned the idea that darkness was for sleeping. She had fed the 4 remaining cattle and checked the water in the trough, which had a small crack along the south seam that she had been meaning to patch for 2 weeks and kept not getting to. She was thinking about the trough patch, and not about her brothers when she heard horses on the road. 2 horses, moving fast enough that the sound of them cut through the still morning air before she could see anything. She stepped out of the barn. Silas and Wade were coming up the road side by side, Silas still on the glossy black horse, Wade on a brown mare that looked tired, both of them riding with a kind of forward urgency that made Eleanor's chest do something unpleasant. She stood in the yard and waited for them. "Morning," Silas said, reining up. "It's early," Eleanor said, "for a social call." "This isn't social." Wade was already dismounting, not looking at her, tying his horse to the fence post beside the gate. "We need to talk about the deed." "We've talked about the deed." "We need to talk about it again." Silas swung down from the black horse. He was still smiling, but the quality of the smile had changed from his previous visit. It was tighter now, less patient. "There are people interested in this land, Eleanor. Serious people, and they are not going to wait while you play homesteader." "I'm not playing anything," she said. "I live here. I work here. This is my land." "That's what we need to discuss," Wade said, and he walked past her toward the house like the conversation was already over. Eleanor turned. "Wade, I didn't invite you inside." "We don't need an invitation," Silas said. "Come on inside and we'll sort this out like family." She followed them because she did not know what else to do. Because standing in the yard alone while they went through her house seemed worse. Because some part of her still, even now, even after everything, believed that some version of reason existed inside her brothers that she could reach if she found the right words. The kitchen was cold. She hadn't yet built up the morning fire. The deed was in the iron box on the shelf above the fireplace where she kept it locked, and she watched Silas's eyes go to the shelf the moment he walked through the door. "Sit down," Wade said to her. "This is my house." "Sit down, Eleanor." The tone of it stopped her. Something in his voice that she had not heard before. Not impatience, not frustration, but something flatter and more deliberate. Like a door closing. She sat. Silas moved to the fireplace shelf. He lifted the iron box like he'd known exactly where it was, which meant one of them had been in the house since her last visit, which meant she pushed the thought away and focused on keeping her breathing even. Key, Silas said. No. He looked at her. Eleanor. No. Wade pulled a chair out from the table and sat across from her, his forearms on the table, his dark eyes on her face. There's a man named Calder Rowe, he said, conversationally, like they were discussing the weather. He represents the Pacific Northern Railroad. He came to see me in Billings 6 weeks ago. He had a very specific number in mind for this land. I don't care about his number. $30,000, Wade said. The number landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. $30,000. It was more money than Eleanor could have made from the ranch in 30 years. It was enough to buy a house in any city she wanted, to never worry about cracked water troughs or frozen creeks or cattle dying in January again. She understood in the abstract what Wade was trying to do with the number. She understood it and she felt it anyway. The pull of it, the terrifying ease of the life it represented. No, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had expected. Wade's jaw tightened. Silas set the iron box on the table with a hard sound. We're not asking, Silas said. The land isn't yours to sell. The deed needs 2 signatures to transfer, Wade said. Harold made a mistake when he filed it that way. He should have listed all 3 of us. That's a conversation we had before he died, and I intend to honor what he intended. That is a lie, Eleanor said. Papa filed that deed himself, and he told me what was in it. My name. Only my name. He was not well when he filed it, Silas said. He was confused. He didn't fully understand what he was signing. Eleanor stood up. Get out of my house, she said. What happened next was very fast and very slow at the same time, the way certain terrible moments organize themselves in memory. A series of still images with the gaps between them missing. Silas moved around the table. She stepped back and her hip caught the edge of the kitchen counter, and she had nowhere to go. He grabbed her right arm at the wrist. She pulled back and he held on, and his grip was much stronger than she had expected because she had spent 11 months thinking of her brothers as men she had already measured and found small. Stop, she said. Silas, stop. Wade came around from the other side. He caught her left arm, and for a moment she was being pulled in 2 directions, her feet losing purchase on the floor, and she understood with a cold clarity that this had been decided before they arrived. This was not a conversation that had gone wrong. This was always what they had come to do. She screamed, not because she thought anyone would hear. The nearest neighbor was 4 miles to the east, and the mountains that cupped the valley on 3 sides had a way of swallowing sound, pulling it up into the rocks, and the pine where it died without an echo. She screamed because her body demanded it, because there was something inside her that refused to be silent, while her own brothers pinned her arms and pushed her toward the floor, because silence felt like a kind of consent she was not willing to give. She screamed, and she kept screaming. Silas had his knee on her left wrist, her arms stretched out across the floorboards. Wade was behind her with both hands on her shoulders, pressing down. They were saying things, calm things, which was somehow worse than if they had been shouting. Just sign it, and this stops. But Eleanor could not make her mouth form words anymore, only the sound that kept tearing itself out of her. She did not know how long it lasted. She did not know, at the time, that the sound was traveling, that the mountains, which she had always thought swallowed everything, had chosen this particular morning to carry her voice up through the pines and across the northeast ridge to a man crouched beside a trap line about 1.5 miles above the valley floor. She did not know his name yet. She did not know that he had heard screaming before, on the frontier, in the war, in a dozen places she would never go, and that he had learned at considerable personal cost the difference between a scream that was ordinary pain and a scream that was someone's life coming apart. She only knew that Silas was pressing something onto the floor in front of her face, a pen, the tip of it inches from her nose, and that Wade's weight on her back made it difficult to expand her chest enough to draw the breath for the next scream. She gathered the breath anyway. She had not survived 11 months of this land alone by being the kind of woman who stopped. The pen pressed closer. Sign it, Silas said. His voice had gone quiet now, which was the most frightening thing he had done yet. Eleanor, just sign it. It doesn't have to be like this. She turned her face away from the pen. Outside, somewhere up in the trees on the ridge above the ranch house, there was the sound of something moving fast. She could not have said how she heard it over the blood in her ears and her own ragged breathing. But she heard it. Footsteps. Someone running downhill through timber, the crackling of branches in a way that was too purposeful and too fast to be an animal. Silas heard it too. He lifted his head. Wade's weight shifted. That was all the space Eleanor needed. She pulled her left arm free and rolled sideways, away from the pen, away from the floorboards, putting the table between herself and Silas in the 3 seconds before the kitchen door came open with a force that knocked it flat against the inside wall, and a man she had never seen in her life walked through it, breathing hard with ice crystals still in his beard from the cold above the tree line. He was not large in the way she might have imagined. He was not the size of the kind of man you'd put in a story to solve a woman's problems. He was lean and weathered, and his eyes moved across the room with the quick, absorptive attention of someone who had spent years reading environments that could kill him. His eyes found her first. Then they found Silas. Then Wade. Then he said, in a voice that was very quiet and completely without inflection, the voice of a man who was not afraid, not performing the absence of fear, simply experiencing it as his natural state. Get away from her. Silas's hand went to the pistol at his hip. What happened next happened before Eleanor could fully process it, and she would spend a long time afterward trying to reconstruct the sequence. The trapper crossing the kitchen in 4 strides, Silas's hand still moving toward the pistol, something catching Silas at the wrist that bent his arm backward at an angle it wasn't designed for, the sound that came with that, and then Silas on the floor with his gun sliding under the kitchen table and an expression on his face that was equal parts agony and pure, undiluted astonishment. Wade came from behind. The trapper released Silas and turned in the same motion, and what he did to Wade was faster and harder to follow. And when it was over, Wade was against the far wall with one hand braced on his knee, trying to remember how to breathe. Silence settled over the kitchen. The trapper stood in the center of it, still breathing hard from his run down the ridge, and he looked at Eleanor again. "You hurt?" he asked. Eleanor was on the floor. Her left arm ached from wrist to shoulder. Her throat felt like she had swallowed sand. "No," she said, which was not entirely true but was the truest thing she was capable of saying in that moment. He nodded once. A short, economical nod. "I'm Rowan Blackridge," he said. "I've got a trap line up on the northeast ridge." "Eleanor Ashcroft," she said. "This is my ranch." He looked at Silas, who was pulling himself up with considerable difficulty against the edge of the table. "These your people?" "My brothers," she said, and the words sat in her mouth with a taste like old metal. Rowan looked at Silas for a moment. "How many others?" Silas said nothing. "How many others?" Rowan asked again. His voice didn't change. It didn't need to. Silas looked at him, then looked at Eleanor, and something passed across his face that was not quite fear and not quite defeat, but was somewhere between the two. "Enough," Silas said, and Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her. Not literally, but in the way that a moment can shift when you understand that what you thought was the worst of it was only the beginning. Rowan Blackridge turned back to her. "Ma'am," he said, "we've got a problem." Rowan didn't move from the center of the kitchen right away. He stood there the way a man stands when he's still calculating, still reading the room, still deciding whether the thing he walked into was finished or just pausing to catch its breath. His eyes went to Silas, who was cradling his wrist against his chest and breathing through his teeth. Then to Wade, who had slid down the wall a few inches and was sitting on the floor with his legs out in front of him like a man who had forgotten how to use them. Then back to Eleanor, who had pulled herself up from the floorboards and was leaning against the kitchen counter with both hands flat on the surface behind her, steadying herself, not wanting anyone to see that her legs were uncertain. "Enough," Silas had said. That word was sitting in the room with all of them. Eleanor looked at Rowan. "What does that mean? Enough?" Rowan didn't answer immediately. He walked to the kitchen table and pulled out a chair and set it in front of Silas, not sitting in it himself but putting it there, the way you'd put something in front of a man to remind him that his options had narrowed considerably. Silas looked at the chair, and then at Rowan, and then, slowly, sat down. "Talk," Rowan said. "I don't have anything to say to you," Silas said. "I don't know who you are." "I'm the man who just broke 2 of your fingers," Rowan said, "and I'm the man who's deciding right now whether the marshal in Millerton needs to hear about what I walked in on.
So you've got about 30 seconds to give me a reason to think there's more to this than what I saw. Silas's jaw worked. He looked at Eleanor with something that might have been an appeal to family loyalty and might have been calculation. With Silas, it was always difficult to separate the two. Eleanor crossed her arms. "Tell him," she said. "There's men coming," Wade said from the floor. His voice was flat and exhausted. He sounded, for the first time Eleanor could remember, like a man who had used up most of what he had. "Tonight. Maybe sooner." The kitchen went very quiet. Eleanor turned her head toward Wade slowly. "What men?" Wade looked up at her. His dark eyes had lost whatever hardness they'd carried when he arrived. What was underneath wasn't soft. It was tired, and something else, something she read as the specific expression of a man who had gotten himself into a current he hadn't expected to be so strong. "Roe's men," he said. "Calder Roe. I told you about him." "The railroad man," Eleanor said. "He's not a railroad man." Wade pushed himself up off the floor, using the wall for support, moving slowly like a man accounting for damage. "He works for the railroad, but what he does isn't railroad work. He's got a crew, 6, maybe 8 men. I don't know exactly how many he brought up from Billings." "What are they here to do?" Rowan asked. Wade looked at him like he was weighing the cost of the answer. "Whatever it takes," he said. "That's how Roe put it to us. Whatever it takes to get the deed transferred before the county recorder's office opens Monday morning. After Monday, the railroad's option on this land expires and they lose the right-of-way for the northern spur line." Eleanor heard the words arrange themselves into something she hadn't fully understood until this moment. The northern spur. She had heard people in Millerton talk about the railroad's plans for a northern line. Vague talk, the kind of speculation that floated around any frontier town where the railroad was expanding. She hadn't connected it to her land specifically. She hadn't understood that the 560 acres of the Bitterroot Valley that her father had scratched out of nothing over 30 years sat directly in the path of something that was worth, to the right people, considerably more than $30,000. "How much is the right-of-way worth to them?" she asked. Silas made a sound that might have been a laugh. "More than you'll ever see." "Silas," Wade said, and there was a warning in it. "She should know what she's holding," Silas said. He was still cradling his wrist, but some of the old sharpness was back in his voice, the thing that was not quite intelligence but was close to it, a kind of animal awareness of leverage and how to apply it. "The northern spur connects the Billings Depot to the copper mines in the Flint Range. You know what copper's worth right now? You know what it'll be worth in 10 years when they've got electrical lines running to every city from here to the Pacific coast? This valley is the only flat route through the mountains for 40 miles in either direction. The railroad doesn't just want this land, they need it. Roe told us the company would pay $200,000 to secure the right-of-way." The number fell into the room like a second stone. Eleanor didn't move. $200,000. The ranch her father had built with 30 years of his life. The land she had bled over for 11 months since his death sat on top of $200,000. And her brothers had known this and had come here with a pen and the weight of their bodies to take it from her. She looked at Silas for a long moment. "And your cut?" she said. "What did Roe promise you?" Silas said nothing. 10%, Wade said quietly. "Each. $20,000 apiece." Eleanor did the arithmetic without wanting to and felt something in her chest go cold and still, not grief exactly, not even anger yet. Something that was more like the moment after an explosion when the air hasn't finished moving. "When Silas said enough men," Rowan said, pulling everyone back from wherever they had gone in their own heads. "I need a number. Best guess." Wade looked at him. 8, maybe 10. Roe doesn't do things small. "Armed?" "Roe's personal man, fellow named Tate, Jude Tate, carries a repeating rifle and he's not shy about it. The others have pistols, at least. Roe will have told them there's no law within riding distance and no witnesses." "He's right about the law," Eleanor said. The words cost her something. "The nearest marshal is in Millerton. That's 22 miles on a road that floods every time it rains, and it rained 2 days ago." Rowan nodded. He was quiet for a moment, and Eleanor watched him think. It was a particular kind of thinking she hadn't seen in a while, not the performed deliberation of men who wanted you to see them being thoughtful, but actual calculation, practical and stripped down, the kind that happened in the body as much as the mind. He was looking at the door, at the windows, at the walls. "This house," he said. "What's it made of?" "Log and mud plaster," Eleanor said. "Papa built the original structure in '61. I reinforced the front wall 2 summers ago with a second layer of logs. Shutters? On the front windows, not the back." "Back windows face which direction?" "South. The barn is south, about 40 yards. Rowan turned to look at her directly. "You have weapons?" "Papa's old Springfield rifle. It's accurate, but it's slow. 1 shot and then you're reloading. I have a shotgun, double barrel, 12 gauge, and a pistol that belonged to my mother, a Remington pocket model, 32 caliber. Ammunition? 23 rifle cartridges, 2 boxes of shotgun shells, maybe 30 rounds for the Remington, I'd have to count." Rowan was quiet again. Eleanor could see him placing those numbers against the number Wade had given, 8 to 10 armed men, and she could see from the way his expression didn't change that the arithmetic was not encouraging. "I have a Henry rifle," he said. 16 rounds in the magazine. I've got maybe 60 cartridges in my pack up on the ridge." "Your pack is on the ridge," Eleanor said. "I'd need to go get it."
How long? 40 minutes up, 20 down if I'm running. She looked at the light coming through the front window. Mid-morning. If Rose's men were coming tonight, they had time. But tonight was a word that could mean a lot of things on the frontier. And Wade had said maybe sooner, and she did not entirely trust Wade's intelligence on the timeline, given that Wade had not, until roughly 15 minutes ago, appeared to have a complete grasp on the situation he had helped to create. "Go," she said. Rowan looked at Silas and Wade. "What do we do with them?" he asked, and the question was directed at Eleanor in a way that made clear he understood it was her decision. That small thing, the fact that he deferred to her, in her own house, about her own situation, registered somewhere in the back of her mind and stayed there. She thought about it. The practical answer was, she couldn't let them leave. If Silas or Wade rode out and found Rose's men before Rowan got back with his rifle, there was no telling what they'd relay. But she also couldn't shoot them, and tying them up in her own kitchen struck her as something that would come with complications she hadn't fully thought through. "The root cellar," she said. "Under the floor in the back room. There's a trapdoor. It bolts from the outside." Rowan nodded. He looked at Silas. "You're going to get up and walk to the back room." "I need a doctor for this wrist," Silas said. "You'll get one. After." "After what?" "After tonight," Rowan said. "On your feet." Silas stood. He moved toward the back room with the particular body language of a man who was conserving his energy for an argument he intended to have later, calculating when to spend what he had left. Wade followed without being told, which Eleanor noted. It was the most cooperative she had ever seen her younger brother, and she found it more unsettling than his usual stubbornness. She heard the trap door, heard Rowan's boots on the backroom floor, heard the bolt slide home. Then he came back through the kitchen, paused at the table, and picked up the iron box with the deed inside it. He held it out to Eleanor. She took it. "Lock that somewhere they couldn't find it even if they got loose," he said, "and not behind the loose brick in the kitchen." Eleanor looked at him sharply. "Your brother's eyes went there twice while he was talking," Rowan said. "Old hiding spot." She didn't say anything. She took the box to the bedroom and pushed it under the floorboard beneath the bed frame. Not a hiding spot she had used before. Not a place anyone would look first. When she came back to the kitchen, Rowan was at the door pulling his coat back on. "When you get up the ridge," she said, "how do you know you won't just keep going?" The question came out before she had fully decided to ask it. She didn't regret it. It was the question that was actually in the room. He stopped with one hand on the doorframe and looked at her over his shoulder. He had a face that had been outside for years, not aged badly, but marked by weather and by something else, something internal that had done its own kind of erosion. He thought about the question for a moment in a way that suggested he wasn't going to deflect it. Because I heard you screaming, he said, and I came down the ridge instead of going the other way. He paused. I've gone the other way before. Didn't care for it. He went out the door and she heard his footsteps cross the porch, and then the yard, and then they faded into the distance going north toward the ridge. Eleanor stood in her kitchen alone. She looked at the flower on the floor from where she'd been pressed against it, the chair knocked sideways, the pen still lying on the table where Silas had dropped it. She looked at all of it for a long moment. Then she picked up the pen and put it in the drawer where she kept the kitchen things. She righted the chair. She did not clean the flower up, not yet, because there wasn't time for what cleaning it properly would require from her emotionally, and she understood herself well enough to know the difference between cleaning something and dealing with it. She went to the back room and listened at the trapdoor. Eleanor, Wade's voice from below. Muffled but clear enough. Eleanor, you need to think about what you're doing. I've been thinking about what I'm doing for 11 months, she said to the door. I'm pretty good at it by now. She went back to the kitchen and loaded the shotgun. The morning moved the way mornings do when you're waiting for something. Slower than any other kind of time, each hour folding in on itself in a way that felt both endless and inadequate. Eleanor kept herself in motion because stillness was worse. She checked the front shutters and found that 2 of the hinges on the left shutter were loose. She tightened them with a screwdriver from the toolbox under the workbench on the porch, working fast, her fingers steady in a way she was grateful for. She filled every pot and pitcher she owned with water from the pump and arranged them in the kitchen and back room. She thought about fire. Fire was the thing she kept coming back to, the thing that frightened her more than bullets, because bullets were fast and fire was slow and thorough and did not leave much. She thought about the barn. The 4 cattle were in it, and beyond the practical loss of the animals, there was the question of what burning the barn would do to her water supply, since the pump mechanism was housed in the structure along the south wall. She thought about moving the cattle into the trees to the east and decided against it. Cattle in strange terrain at night were unpredictable and loud in the wrong ways. She was on the porch when she saw the rider. Not Rowan. She had been watching the northern tree line for Rowan, and this came from the south road, from the direction of Millerton, still far enough away that she couldn't read the details. A single rider, moving at a steady walk, not hurrying. She went back inside and took the Remington from the shelf and put it in the pocket of her work dress and came back to the porch and waited. The rider came into the yard and stopped. He was perhaps 50, with a neat gray beard and a wool coat that was too clean for the road, and he sat on his horse with the posture of a man accustomed to having people wait while he collected himself. He looked at Eleanor on the porch with an expression of polite and absolute confidence. "Miss Ashcroft," he said. "I don't know you," Eleanor said. "Calder Row," he said. "Pacific Northern Railroad." She kept her face still. "You've come a long way for a land negotiation." "I like to handle important matters personally," he said. He looked around the yard with the practiced eye of a man appraising property, which was exactly what he was doing. "Beautiful valley. Your father chose well." "My father worked for 30 years to build what's in this valley," Eleanor said. "He didn't choose it like you choose a cut of meat. He made it." Rose smiled. The smile was not hostile. It was the smile of a man who had heard versions of this sentiment many times and had developed a genuine patience for it. "I have great respect for what your father accomplished," he said, "which is why I came myself rather than sending a representative. I want to offer you something fair." "Your representatives are in my root cellar," Eleanor said. The smile didn't change, but something behind it shifted. He looked at the house, at the shuttered front windows, back at Eleanor. "My brothers," she said. "The ones you sent ahead. They're in the root cellar, and they'll stay there until a marshal can collect them." "I didn't send your brothers anywhere," Rose said carefully. "Whatever arrangement they came to you with, that was their initiative." "Mr. Rowe," Eleanor said, "I have a shotgun inside this door, and I have no particular reason to be patient with you. Tell me what you actually want." He looked at her for a moment. The patience in his face had genuine depth to it. It was not a thin patience, the kind that breaks with a little pressure, but something more like the patience of a man who had built a career on outlasting other people's resistance. He reached into his coat and produced a folded document and held it up. "A deed transfer," he said, "signed today.
I have a notarized letter of authorization that allows me to witness the signature in lieu of a county official, perfectly legal under Montana territorial law.
You sign this, I hand you a bank draft for $35,000. I've added $5,000 to the figure your brothers discussed with you, and you're free to go wherever you choose. And if I don't sign it? He folded the document and put it away. Then we have a problem, he said, and problems, in my experience, have a way of becoming expensive for everyone involved. Eleanor looked at him carefully. He had come alone, which meant the men Wade had described were either already positioned somewhere she couldn't see or were behind him on the road. She looked past him toward the south tree line. Nothing moved, but that was not reassuring. I'd like you to leave my property, she said. Miss Ashcroft, now, she said, and if you send men onto this land tonight, I will make certain the marshal in Millerton knows your name and what you authorized. I've already written the letter. It's addressed and ready to send. This last part was not true, but Roe didn't know that. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned his horse slowly and rode back down the south road the way he had come, unhurried, the neat wool coat moving gently in the afternoon air. Eleanor went inside and sat down at the kitchen table and put her hands flat on the surface and focused on keeping them from shaking, which they wanted to do now that Roe was out of sight. She gave herself 3 minutes for this. She counted them. Then she stood up and went to work. She had moved the second heaviest piece of furniture, the oak sideboard from the back room, to a position below the south window by the time she heard Rowan's boots on the porch steps. He came through the door with his pack over one shoulder and his Henry rifle in his right hand, breathing hard from the run down the ridge, with pine needles caught in his coat and a look in his eyes that said he had been thinking the whole way down. He came early, she said. Rowan stopped. Who did? Roe. He was here. He left maybe an hour ago. Alone? He rode in alone. That doesn't mean he came alone. Rowan set his pack on the table and began pulling things out. Cartridge boxes, a coil of wire she didn't immediately understand the purpose of, 2 bundles wrapped in oilcloth that he set aside carefully. He was looking at the approaches, counting windows. That's what a man like that does before he sends others in. Eleanor pulled out a chair and sat. He offered $35,000. Rowan glanced up. I told him no, she said. He went back to his pack. Good. It's a lot of money. It's your land, he said without particular emphasis. Not as a judgment, he said it the way you'd note a fact about the weather. Matter of fact and complete. She watched him work. The wire, she said. What's that for? Trip lines, he said. North and east approaches, where the tree line comes close to the house. Won't stop them, but it'll slow them and it'll make noise, which in the dark is worth more than you'd think. And the oilcloth bundles? He paused. Then he unwrapped one, carefully. Inside was a metal cylinder the size of a large fist with a fuse running out the sealed end. Eleanor had not seen anything like it up close, but she had heard descriptions. Dynamite, she said. 3 sticks, he said. I used them to clear log jams on the creek above my winter camp. I brought 2 down thinking I might need to clear a beaver dam this week. He wrapped it back up carefully. Do you know how to use them? Eleanor said, and it was not quite a question. I know enough, he said, which she would come to understand was Rowan's version of yes. Outside, the afternoon light had begun to soften toward evening, the way it did in the mountains, not gradually, but in stages, as if the light was making decisions. The shadows from the eastern ridge were already reaching toward the house. Eleanor looked at the shadows and thought about what was out there in them, coming toward her. She thought about her father, who had built this house with hands rougher than hers, who had told her once when she was maybe 12 years old that the measure of a person wasn't what they did when things were easy, but what they did when they ran out of easy choices. She had never fully understood what he meant until approximately right now. She got up and went to the window and looked out at the yard, at the fence her father had built, at the barn she had repaired, at the gate she had rehung twice since his death, at the long grass of the meadow going golden in the failing afternoon light. Mr. Blackridge, she said without turning from the window. Rowan, he said. Rowan. The name felt strange in her mouth. Not wrong,
just unfamiliar, the way the first time you use a new tool feels slightly off before it becomes natural. Do you think we can hold it? He was quiet for a moment. I think, he said slowly, that we've got better odds than they're expecting, and in my experience, that's usually enough. It wasn't a promise. He didn't say it like a promise. He said it the way a man says the only true thing available to him, which Eleanor respected more than comfort would have given her. She turned from the window.
"Tell me what you need me to do," she said, and Rowan Blackridge began. They spent what remained of the afternoon preparing for something neither of them said out loud. But both of them understood with complete clarity. The men coming tonight were not coming to negotiate. Rowan worked the trip lines first, moving out from the house in a low crouch, threading the wire between fence posts and tree stumps along the north and east approaches where the tree line pressed closest to the yard. He moved without wasted motion, the way a man moves when he has done difficult physical things alone for years and has stripped all the performance out of it. Eleanor watched him from the porch for a few minutes, and then went back inside because watching made her anxious in a way that was not useful. She inventoried the ammunition twice: 23 rifle cartridges, 2 full boxes of shotgun shells which came to 48 rounds, and she found 31 cartridges for the Remington when she counted them properly. She laid everything out on the kitchen table in organized rows and then moved it all to the back room, below the south window behind the oak sideboard she had dragged into position, because the back room had the thickest interior wall, and because Rowan had said, when she'd asked where she should position herself, "Wherever you can see south and east without being seen from outside." She had not told him she had never shot at a person before. She had decided this was not information that would help either of them right now. When Rowan came back inside, the light was fully gone from the sky, and a wind had picked up from the northwest, the kind of wind that came down off the high peaks carrying the smell of cold and the distant promise of weather. He looked at what she had done with the back room, the sideboard, the ammunition laid out in reach of the south window, a bucket of water and a cloth beside it, and he nodded once in the economical way she was already learning to read. "You moved the sideboard yourself," he said. "It wasn't going to move itself." He almost smiled. She caught the edge of it before it disappeared. He moved to the front room and she followed him, and he showed her what he had worked out. The Henry rifle at the front window on the left, the Springfield at the front window on the right, which Eleanor would manage because the Springfield's slow reload meant it needed someone steady and patient rather than fast. The shotgun he told her to keep close regardless of where she was, because in darkness and in close quarters it was more reliable than precise aim, and he said this without any condescension in it, just practicality, the way he said most things. "The dynamite," Eleanor said. He had placed both bundles, 2 sticks together in one alone, on the shelf beside the front door where they could be reached without fumbling. "The larger charge goes east if they try to mass on that side," he said. "The smaller one I'm keeping for something specific." "What specific thing?" "I don't know yet," he said, "but there'll be a moment. There's always a moment." She didn't find this as reassuring as he might have intended it, but she didn't say so. They ate because Rowan said flatly that they should eat, and Eleanor heated the remainder of a pot of bean soup she had made 2 days ago, and they ate it standing at the kitchen counter in the near dark, the only light a single candle set back from any window. The soup was oversalted, and the beans were soft past the point of having texture, and neither of them mentioned either thing. "How long have you been on the ridge?" Eleanor asked. 3 years, roughly? Roughly. I stopped counting exactly after the first winter. She looked at the side of his face, what she could see of it in the candlelight. By choice? He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Started that way, he said finally. Kept on because it got easier than the other thing. The other thing being people. The other thing being people, he agreed. She didn't push it. She understood, more than she might have a year ago, how a person could arrive at that arithmetic. The calculation that the absence of other humans cost less than their presence. She had spent 11 months in something close to that condition herself, and while she had not chosen it the way Rowan apparently had, she had noticed certain compensations. The particular quiet of a morning when no one else's needs were pressing on you. The clean simplicity of problems that were entirely your own. "You were in the war," she said. He looked at her then. "What makes you say that?" "The way you moved in the kitchen this morning," she said. "You didn't hesitate. You didn't think about it. You just moved through it like you'd done it before and knew where everything was going to be." He turned back to his soup. "I was at Gettysburg," he said, "and 2 places after that don't have names most people know." She didn't ask anything else about it. Some information is complete in itself. They washed the bowls in the dark. She washed, he dried, an arrangement that arrived naturally without discussion. And then Rowan blew out the candle and they took their positions and the waiting began. It is a particular kind of waiting, the kind before violence you know is coming. It is nothing like impatience and nothing like boredom, though it shares certain surface qualities with both. Eleanor sat behind the oak sideboard with the shotgun across her knees and the Remington in her dress pocket and the darkness of the back room around her, and she found that her mind went to very specific small things. The loose thread on the left cuff of her work dress that she had been meaning to trim for a week, the smell of the bean soup still in the kitchen, the sound of the wind picking up outside, moving through the gap under the back door with a thin whistle that came and went in pulses. She thought about her father, not in a grief-soaked way, not the way she had thought about him in the months right after his death, when the absence of him had been a physical presence in the house, heavier than furniture. She thought about him practically, specifically, the way you think about a person when you're trying to access something they gave you. She thought about his hands, about the way he had held a rifle, which was with a carefulness that some people mistook for hesitation, and which was actually the opposite, a discipline, a refusal to point a weapon at anything he was not fully prepared to kill. He had taught her that. She had resented the lesson at the time because she was 14 and resented most of what he tried to teach her. She was grateful for it now. The first trip line went at 11:17. She knew it was 11:17 because she had been checking the small clock on the bedroom shelf through the open doorway every quarter hour and had just checked it. The sound was a single sharp metallic ring, the wire snapping taut and then parting, followed immediately by the sound of someone stumbling, a muffled curse, and then silence that was worse than the sound had been, because the silence meant they had caught themselves and recovered. "North," Rowan's voice came from the front room. Very quiet. "1 man, maybe 2. Stay put." She stayed put. For 3 minutes, nothing else happened. The wind came and went. The cattle in the barn made a low sound, collective unease, the sound animals make when something in the air has changed. Eleanor pressed her back against the sideboard and watched the south window, which was a dark rectangle holding nothing but the slightly lighter darkness of the outside. Then the south window held a shape. It was there for only a moment, a head and shoulders, angled sideways, a man looking in. She did not fire. She made herself not fire. The man was looking in from the outside and could not see her in the dark, and firing now would waste the element of the only surprise she had, which was that anyone in this house was prepared and positioned and waiting. The shape moved away from the window. She heard Rowan move in the front room. Not stumbling, not accidental, but a deliberate shift of weight. Then his voice, still quiet. "They're on 3 sides. Setting up. Give me a count of 3. She didn't understand what he meant until she heard him reach the front door, and then it came clear. He was going to open it, and the count of 3 was for her to be braced for what followed. 1, Rowan said. She brought the shotgun up and angled it toward the south window. 2. She found the place on the trigger guard her thumb would need to be. 3. Rowan opened the front door and fired the Henry once into the darkness to the north, a crack of sound that split the night open, and everything happened at once. The south window came in. Not the glass, there was no glass, just the wooden shutter she had closed and latched, and it came in from the outside with the weight of a man's shoulder behind it, the latch snapping, the shutter swinging inward and hitting the wall. Eleanor fired the shotgun at the opening. The blast in the enclosed space of the back room was a physical thing, pressure against her ears and chest, and the man who had come through the window did not come through it anymore. She heard him fall back outside, against the outer wall, sliding. From the front of the house, the Henry was firing in a steady, controlled rhythm. Not fast, not panicked, but measured, the particular cadence of someone choosing shots. Return fire came through the front wall, 2 holes appearing in the log surface with the sound of an axe striking wood, and Eleanor understood for the first time in a fully physical way that the walls her father had built were absorbing bullets, and she felt a surge of something she could not name. Not gratitude, something older than gratitude, something more like being held. She reloaded the shotgun in the dark by feel alone, which she had practiced that afternoon because Rowan had said to practice it, and her hand shook enough on the second shell that she dropped it and had to find it on the floor by touch. And she did find it, and she loaded it, and she was back at the window by the time the second man tried to come through. This one was more cautious. He came low, one leg over the sill first, and she didn't fire at him because she couldn't see him cleanly, and because Rowan had told her, at some point in the afternoon's preparation, she could not now recall exactly when, that a shotgun at the wrong angle in a small space could do things you didn't intend. She waited, her whole body rigid, until she heard him land on the floor inside the room. Then she swung the barrel toward the sound and fired. He went down. She didn't think about what that meant yet. There would be time to think about what it meant. Not now. From outside came a sound she had not expected. Shouting, not battle sounds, but coordinated shouting. Men calling positions to each other, which meant they had a system, which meant whoever was running this operation had planned it beyond the level of simply rushing the house. She heard the word south and the word flank, and then a different voice, flat and carrying. She could hear it even through the walls, saying, "Burn it." The word hit her like cold water. She moved from the back room to the kitchen doorway. "They're going to burn it," she called out. "I heard," Rowan said from the front room. His voice was tight in a way it had not been before. "Stay low." She smelled the smoke 11 seconds later. Not a lot of it. A thin thread, acrid. The smell of something being intentionally started rather than accidentally caught. The south exterior wall. They had put fire against the south exterior wall, which was the wall of the back room she had just vacated, and the log and mud plaster construction that had stopped bullets was going to slow the fire but not stop it, because nothing stopped fire if you gave it enough time and enough fuel, and the dry September grass against the foundation was fuel enough. Rowan came through from the front room. He was moving fast, and there was something dark on his left forearm. She caught it in the dimness and could not tell how bad. And he went past her toward the back room door and looked at the wall. "How long?" Eleanor said. 20 minutes before it's in the wall, longer before it's a real problem inside. He turned back. "They want us to run. Front and north are covered. They're betting we come out the front." "Are we running?" "No." He went back to the front room and she followed him, and he was at the shelf by the door where the dynamite sat. He picked up the larger bundle, 2 sticks together, and turned to her. "The east side. There's a gap in the tree line about 60 yards out. I saw it when I was running the wire this afternoon. That's where they'll have most of the men staged. If I can get that charge into the gap." "The gap is 60 yards from the house," Eleanor said. "You'd have to go outside." "I'd have to go outside," he agreed. She looked at him. She did not want to say the obvious thing, which was that going outside meant crossing open ground in the dark, with men positioned around the house. And she could see from his face that he had already fully processed this and arrived at the same destination she had, which was that there was no good option, but that some options were less bad than others. "Go through the north window," she said, "not the door. The door is what they're watching." He looked at her with a sharpness that was, she would realize later, something close to respect. "North window," he said. "I'll lay down fire from the front," she said. "The Springfield. Slow, but it'll make noise, and noise is attention." "You've fired a rifle before." "I grew up on this ranch," she said, and the sentence contained everything it needed to. He took the bundle and the smaller single stick, both tucking the single stick inside his coat, and went to the north window. Eleanor went to the front window on the right and picked up the Springfield. It was her father's rifle, worn smooth at the grip from 30 years of his hand, and holding it in that moment felt less like holding a weapon and more like holding a conversation with something that had outlasted him. She pushed the shutter open 6 inches and fired into the darkness toward the east tree line. She reloaded. The Springfield was slow, and she was fast with it, faster than most people would have expected from someone who had never needed to reload under pressure before. And she fired again, and then a third time, and the return fire that came back peppered the front wall above her head
and she pressed herself below the windowsill and counted to 4 and came back up and fired a 4th time. From the north side of the house, she heard Rowan go through the window. A scrabble of movement, brief. And then the yard outside went quiet in the way that only happens when a person who knows what they're doing is moving through it. She kept firing. Reload, rise, fire, drop. The rhythm of it became almost mechanical, and there was something in that mechanicalness that kept the fear at bay. Not eliminated, not even reduced exactly, but managed, kept in a box while her hands and eyes did the immediate work. The explosion came without warning. She had known it was coming. She had been waiting for it. And still it arrived as a shock, a concussive thud that she felt in her sternum and in the bones of her face, followed immediately by a pressure wave that rattled the front shutters against their frames and made the candle holders jump on the kitchen shelf. Through the front window, she saw the orange bloom of it in the east tree line, there and then collapsing. And she heard the shouts that followed. Genuine shock, genuine disarray, men calling to each other in the dark with panic in their voices. She reloaded and fired into the confusion. From her left, north side, outside, she heard Rowan's Henry going fast, faster than she had heard it go all night, the measured cadence gone, firing at the rate the magazine allowed, which was very fast. She understood. He was not behind cover. He was outside in the yard, and he was moving, and he was firing as fast as the Henry would cycle. And the men who had been positioned on the north and east were dealing with fire from a direction they had not expected, and with the disorientation of the explosion all at once. The firing from outside slowed, then slowed more. Then, for a period of maybe 30 seconds that felt considerably longer, it stopped. Eleanor waited, the Springfield half raised at the front window. The back room was smoky now. She could smell it past the gunpowder smell that had taken over the house. Not dangerous yet. Rowan had said 20 minutes and it had been perhaps 12, but it was present, no longer theoretical. Eleanor, Rowan's voice from outside. North side, close. Don't shoot. I'm coming in the window. Come in the window, she said. He came through head first and got his feet under him and stood up, and she could see in the dimness that the thing on his left arm was blood, a clean, dark streak from above the elbow to the wrist, and his coat on that side was darker than the other. He saw her looking. Graze, he said. Deep graze. Not a clean hit. Keep going. He went to the front window and looked out. Then he turned and looked toward the back room. Fire's still going, she said. South wall. Exterior. We need water on it from inside before it gets into the logs. He was already moving. She followed him to the kitchen where she had left the filled pots and pitchers, and they carried them to the back room and poured them against the interior of the south wall, low, where she could already feel the heat coming through, and the hiss and steam of it was considerable. They went back for more water and then more. And on the fourth trip, the steam from the wall smelled less like active burning and more like wet char, which was different and better. Is it out? She asked. Not out, he said. But it's not growing. We bought time. She became aware, while they stood in the back room with empty water vessels, that the sound outside had changed. The organized shouting had stopped. There was still movement out there. She could hear it, the particular sound of multiple people moving through brush, but moving away, moving in the direction of the south road rather than toward the house. They're pulling back, she said. Some of them, Rowan said. Not all. She knew what he meant. Wade had described 8 to 10 men, and the explosion and Rowan's fire in the yard had scattered what had been a coordinated assault into something less organized. But men in Calder Row's employ were not regular outlaws looking for easy opportunity. They had a specific task, a specific deadline, and a man behind them who expected results. Tate, Eleanor said, the man Wade described, the one with the repeating rifle. Rowan nodded. He wasn't in the east tree line when the charge went off. I looked for him and didn't find him, which means he was somewhere else. Where? Rowan looked at the front of the house. High ground, he said. If I were Tate, I'd want high ground to the south after the east side went wrong. There's a small rise at the south end of the yard, just past the barn. Eleanor thought about the rise. A low hill, barely deserving the name, where the yard met the meadow. Her father had kept a water barrel there for the cattle in summer. From there, a man with a repeating rifle could cover the front of the house, the main door, both front windows, and anyone coming out of the barn. "He's pinning us," she said. "He's keeping us inside while Roe makes a decision," Rowan said. "Roe's out there somewhere. The men who pulled back didn't go all the way down the south road. They stopped. I could hear them stop." She could hear it now, too. Not movement, but the absence of it in a specific way, the way a group of people go still when they're waiting for an order. 200 yards, maybe less. Waiting. The smoke smell from the back room was still present, but stable. The clock on the bedroom shelf, which she could see from the hallway, read 23 minutes past midnight.
She looked at Rowan's arm. The sleeve was soaked dark from mid-forearm up. "Let me look at that," she said. "It's fine." "You don't know that." "I can feel that," he said. "It's bleeding because that's what cuts do. It's not—" He moved the arm, rotated it, extended and flexed the hand. "It's not deep enough to matter tonight." She wanted to argue this. She looked at his face and saw the set of it and understood that arguing would take energy from both of them that was better spent elsewhere. She went to the shelf where she kept her kitchen cloth and tore a strip from the worn end and came back and wrapped it around his forearm above the worst of the bleeding without asking his permission, tying it firm. He let her do it without pulling away, which she took as acknowledgement, if not agreement. "The single stick," she said. "You still have it." He reached inside his coat and produced it. One stick, fuse intact. "Roe won't come to the house himself," Eleanor said slowly, thinking out loud the way she had when she was a girl and her father was still alive to hear her think. "He'll stay back. If the men don't succeed, he'll try something different." "Try what?" "He had a legal document when he came this afternoon," she said. "A deed transfer. He told me he had authorization to witness signatures." She looked at Rowan. "What if he tries to use my brothers?" Rowan was quiet. "The root cellar bolt can be opened from the outside," she said. "The bolt is on the trap door and the trap door is inside the house, but the access to the back room is through the south window, and we just lost the shutter on the south window and a man could get in." Rowan was already moving. He went through the kitchen and into the back room, and Eleanor heard him at the trap door, the bolt sliding, then Rowan's voice low. "You two, come up." A pause. Silas's voice. "What's happening?" "Get up," Rowan said. The sound of them climbing out. Silas first, then Wade, both of them stiff and slow from hours below. Eleanor moved to the doorway and looked at her brothers in the smoky dimness of the back room. They were disheveled, Wade's jacket torn at the shoulder, Silas still cradling his bad hand. They both looked at the state of the room, the wet wall, the blown-in shutter, the spent shells on the floor, with the expressions of men recalibrating the situation they were in. "Roe's outside," Eleanor said. Silas looked at her. "Your men outside," Eleanor said, and caught herself. "His men. They tried to burn the house. They're regrouping." She paused. "If Roe gets to you, either of you, and gets a signature on that deed transfer, does he need me?" Silas and Wade exchanged a look. It was a short look, the kind between people who have been having the same long argument for years and have learned to compress it. "The deed is in both our names," Silas said. "Harold's and Eleanor's, 2 signatures to transfer." "Only mine and Papa's," Eleanor said. "I told you it's only—" "There were 2 filings," Wade said quietly. "Harold filed the primary deed in your name only. Silas is telling the truth that there was a conversation with Harold before he died. Harold filed an addendum 6 weeks before he died, we think. We're not completely certain, adding Silas as a secondary holder." The room changed. Eleanor stood in it and let the words arrange themselves and rearrange themselves and settle into the shape they were always going to settle into. "You think," she said. "Roe's lawyer thinks," Wade said. "It's contested. It may not hold. But Roe believes it's enough to make the transfer plausible. And in territorial law, plausible is sometimes sufficient if there's no one present to contest it immediately." "Is Silas going to sign it?" Eleanor said. She was looking at Silas while she said it. Silas looked back at her. His face in the dim and smoky air was tired in a way that was different from Wade's tiredness. Wade's tiredness was the tiredness of a man who had gotten in over his head. Silas's tiredness was something older. The particular exhaustion of a man who had been making wrong choices for so long that the weight of them had finally gotten heavier than the potential reward. "No," Silas said. Eleanor waited. "I'm not signing it," he said again, and the second time had the quality of a man hearing himself make a decision and deciding it sounded right. "Roe can take his $30,000 and go to hell." He looked at Wade. "I'm done with this." Wade stared at him for a moment. Then he looked at Eleanor. "Same," he said. The word was small and plain and cost him something she could see it costing. It was not forgiveness. It was nowhere near forgiveness. That was a country she could not even see from where she was standing tonight, and she did not pretend otherwise. But it was information. It was a shift in the composition of the room she was in. Rowan looked at Silas. "Can you fire a pistol left-handed?" "I've got my pistol," Silas said. "Can you fire it left-handed?" Rowan said again. Silas looked at his broken right hand. "I can try." "Try is what I've got," Rowan said. He looked at Eleanor. "Tate's on the rise at the south end of the yard. I need someone to take the Henry at the front window and hold the north approach. That's where I'd come back from if I were them." He held up the single stick of dynamite. "I need a path to the south rise." Eleanor understood what he was proposing. She understood it, and she looked at the single stick and at his wrapped forearm and at the darkness beyond the blown-in south window. "The barn," she said. "There's a door on the east side inside the barn, 40 yards from the south rise. If you come out the east barn door and go south along the fence line, you'll be behind Tate," Rowan said, finishing it. He nodded. "But I have to get to the barn first." "South window," she said. "It's already open." He looked at her without speaking for a moment. "Be careful," she said, and the words came out simpler and more direct than she had intended them to, without any of the qualifying language she might have wrapped around them if she'd thought about it first. He took the single stick from his coat and checked the fuse length. Then he went to the south window and looked out for 15 seconds, reading the dark the way she was slowly learning he read everything. Not quickly, not impatiently, but with a complete and deliberate attention. Then he went through the window, and the night took him, and Eleanor turned to her brothers and said, "Pick up something useful." And Silas bent and picked up the Springfield from where it leaned against the wall, left-handed, awkward, and Wade found the Remington on the back room floor where it had fallen from Eleanor's pocket during the earlier confusion. And Eleanor took the shotgun in both hands and went to the kitchen doorway. Outside, from the direction of the south rise, she heard Jude Tate's repeating rifle fire twice in rapid succession, and she did not let herself think about what that meant, only moved to the front window and put her eye to the gap in the shutter and watched the darkness for what was coming next. 2 shots from the south rise. That was what she had heard, and her mind kept returning to it the way a tongue returns to a sore tooth, involuntarily, compulsively, even when she was trying to focus on something else. She forced herself to focus on something else. The north approach was quiet in a way that had a shape to it. Not empty quiet, occupied quiet. The difference between a room with no one in it and a room where someone is holding their breath, and Eleanor had spent enough solitary months in this house to know the difference between those two kinds of silence better than most people ever learn. She pressed her eye to the gap in the front shutter and watched the darkness beyond the yard and counted the things she could see against the things she could only hear and the things she could only feel as a cold pressure at the base of her neck. Silas was at the front right window with the Springfield across the sill, shooting left-handed, the stock pressed awkwardly against his off shoulder. He had not shot yet. He was waiting, the way she was waiting, the way you wait when you have learned, either through training or through the hard instruction of a single terrible night, that a shot fired wrong costs more than it gains. Wade was behind her in the kitchen doorway, the Remington in both hands, watching the back of the house through the hallway. He had not spoken in several minutes, neither had she. There was an understanding between them now that had no language attached to it, and did not need any. She heard the third shot from the south rise, and this one was different. The report of it had a different pitch, not Tate's repeating rifle, which had a particular flat crack she had cataloged through the front wall over the past hour, but something smaller, a pistol shot, and then a sound she couldn't identify immediately, and then silence of a different texture than what had come before. "Someone fired back," Wade said from the kitchen doorway. "I heard," Eleanor said. She waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The North approach stayed occupied, quiet. That shaped silence, the held breath kind. The cattle in the barn had gone entirely still, which was either because they had grown accustomed to the noise or because something had changed in a way animals register before people do. Then from the south, from somewhere near the barn, came Rowan's voice. Not a shout. He was not a man who shouted, but pitched to carry, the voice of someone who had spent years calibrating sound against distance in open country. Eleanor, it's done on this side. She did not let herself exhale all the way. Done on this side was not the same as done. North, she called back, just the word, just the direction. A pause. Then, how many? She looked at Silas. Silas looked out through the right window with the careful attention of a man who had grown up on this land and knew what things were supposed to look like in the dark, and could identify what wasn't supposed to be there. 3, he said, maybe 4 at the tree line. 3 or 4 north, she called out, a longer pause. She could hear movement south of the barn. Rowan repositioning, she thought, moving along the fence line. And then the north tree line did something she had not expected. It moved. Not all of it, but a section of it, 60 yards out, shifted in a way that wasn't wind. 3 shapes detached from the dark mass of the trees and moved toward the yard, low and fast, and she understood in the same instant that they had heard Rowan's voice from the south and had understood what it meant, and had decided that their window for action had just closed to something very small, and they were using what was left of it. She fired the shotgun through the gap in the front shutter. The blast in the enclosed space hit her ears like a physical blow, and she pulled back from the window on reflex, and in the 2 seconds it took her to recover her position, she heard Silas fire the Springfield once, awkward and slow with his left hand, but accurate enough because Silas had been shooting on this land since he was 8 years old, and muscle memory does not entirely disappear, and the 3 shapes in the yard became 2 shapes and then 1 shape, and then that shape dropped flat to the ground and stayed there. Return fire came through the front wall. 2 shots, both high, both striking the upper logs where the chinking had gaps. Plaster dust came down. Eleanor pressed herself below the windowsill and reloaded the shotgun in the dark by feel, and the shells went in correctly this time because her hands had decided they were done shaking and had simply become hands that did what was needed. Wade, she said. Here, from the kitchen doorway. Front door. Don't open it. Just be at it. She heard him move. The shape in the yard that had dropped flat had not moved again. The 4th man, if there was a 4th man, had not shown himself. The occupied silence from the tree line had changed to something that felt less organized, more individual. Eleanor had never been in a battle before tonight, and she had never expected to understand the feel of one by being inside it, but she was beginning to understand certain things. She was beginning to understand that the difference between a group of men with a plan and a group of men whose plan had stopped working was detectable, like a change in air pressure before a storm. She heard boots on the porch. Not 1 person. 2. Moving fast and not trying to be quiet, which meant they had committed to something. Wade, she said sharply. The front door came in before Wade could reach it, the latch blowing apart from a kick that was well placed and hard. The door swinging inward and hitting the wall in the same way Rowan's entry had done that morning, except that this time the person coming through was not Rowan. And he was not alone. The first man through was built wide and had a pistol leveled, and the second man behind him was tall, and she couldn't see his face clearly in the dark. Wade fired the Remington twice from the kitchen doorway. Both shots fired at a range of approximately 8 feet in near total darkness, which should have been insufficient, but was not entirely insufficient because the first man went sideways and hit the wall and stayed on his feet, but stayed on his feet differently, damaged, the pistol lowering. The second man turned toward Wade. Eleanor swung the shotgun from the window to the doorway and fired, and the noise of it in the front room was enormous, and the second man went down. The first man, the wide one, was still on his feet against the wall with the pistol coming back up. Silas hit him with the Springfield like a club. Not a shot. The rifle not raised, not aimed, just swung sideways with Silas's left arm across the man's forearm above the wrist, hard and fast, and the pistol hit the floor and the man slid down the wall. Silas stood over him, breathing hard, the Springfield in his left hand at his side. His broken right hand was pressed against his stomach. Eleanor looked at her brother. Silas looked at the man on the floor. then at Eleanor. "He was going to shoot you," Silas said, and said it like a man explaining something he was still working out himself. The house went quiet. Not the occupied quiet of before, something different. Eleanor stood in the middle of her front room with the shotgun still in her hands and the door hanging open on the damaged latch, and the smell of gunpowder so thick in the air that it had its own taste, and she listened to the quiet and tried to read it. From outside, from the south, came the sound of a single horse moving fast, moving away, moving in the direction of the south road. One horse, not multiple, which meant it was not the remaining men retreating. They were still out there, still in the trees or in the yard, but they were not moving. They were waiting again, but the shape of the waiting had changed once more, and Eleanor understood from the direction of the departing hoofbeats what had changed it. Calder Row was leaving. She understood it before she had the words for it. The man who had come to her porch that afternoon with a folded deed transfer and $35,000 and absolute patience was on a horse going south, and the men he had brought were now a collection of injured and frightened people scattered across her yard and her tree line without their employer's direction. Men hired for a specific job do not typically continue performing that job after the person who hired them has left the premises. But that was not the feeling that came over her when she heard the hoofbeats fade. The feeling that came over her was a different kind of cold. Because Rowe was leaving, which meant he had decided that tonight's approach had failed, which meant that a man like Calder Rowe, patient, methodical, the kind of man who came personally to make sure important things were handled, was going to find a different approach. He had a document. He had lawyers. He had a railroad company with more money than Eleanor could fully conceptualize, and a land option that expired Monday morning, and 2 days remained between tonight and Monday morning. She went to the front door and stepped onto the porch. The yard was dark. She could see 2 figures on the ground near the fence line, and one against the barn wall in the shape of the flat man in the yard who had not moved. She could hear, from the east tree line, the sound of movement, people moving through brush in the direction of the south road, quiet and purposeful, the sound of men who had decided to be somewhere else. "Rowan," she said. Silence. She stepped off the porch into the yard. "Rowan." From the south end of the barn, from the shadow beside the east door. "Here." She crossed the yard to him. He was leaning against the barn wall with his back against the logs, and his right hand pressed flat against his left side, below the ribs, and she knew before she reached him what that posture meant. Because she had seen her father come in from the field once, holding himself that same way after a fence post had kicked back and caught him, and this was worse than a fence post. "How bad?" she said. "It's in there," he said. "Tate's bullet. I got to him, but he got me first." She crouched beside him. She could not see the wound clearly in the dark, but she could feel the dampness on his shirt when she put her hand there, and she could feel from his breathing, shallow, careful, controlled, the quality of the pain he was managing. "We need to get you inside," she said. "In a minute." He was looking at the south road. Rowe left. "I heard him go." "He'll be in Millerton before morning," Rowan said. "He'll find a judge he can reach. Or he'll file a contested claim with the county recorder first thing Monday. And if that addendum Wade mentioned actually exists—" "It exists," said Wade's voice from the porch. He had come out without either of them noticing. "I've seen it. Rowe's lawyer showed it to me in Billings. Harold filed it 6 weeks before he died. A secondary title addendum, adding Silas as co-holder." He came down the porch steps slowly. "I should have told you before. I don't have a reason that's good enough." Eleanor did not look at him. She was looking at Rowan, at the way he was managing his breathing, at the hand pressed against his side. "Get him inside," she said to Wade. Wade came and put Rowan's right arm over his shoulders, and Rowan let him, which told Eleanor something about the pain level because Rowan did not appear to be a man who accepted help easily or often. They got him across the yard and up the porch steps and through the front door, navigating past the man Silas had knocked down, who was conscious now and sitting against the wall and looked like a man who had revised his evening plans considerably. And into the back room where Eleanor had a better light and her medical supplies in the box under the side table. She lit the lamp. The wound was in the left side, below the last rib, and she had enough basic knowledge from 11 months of living alone on a ranch 30 miles from the nearest doctor to understand the range of what it could be. The bullet was in there. She could not see it, and she was not going to try to retrieve it. That was beyond what she knew how to do. But the bleeding was not the explosive kind, not arterial, and when she pressed clean cloth against it and held pressure and watched Rowan's face, the quality of his expression told her that the pain was severe, but not the pain of something catastrophic opening inside him. "You need a doctor," she said. "Millerton," he said. "Tomorrow." "That's 22 miles. "In the morning, the road will be passable," he said. "It's been 2 days since the rain." She held the cloth against the wound and looked at his face and said, "You're going to have an opinion about everything, aren't you?" "Probably," he said. She wrapped the wound with strips torn from the cleanest cloth she had and bound it firm, tight enough to hold pressure. And he did not make a sound through any of this, though she could see from his jaw what it was costing him. When she was done, she sat back on her heels and looked at him. He was pale in the lamplight in a way he had not been earlier, and his eyes were dark and fully present in the way of someone using most of their concentration on something internal. "Silas!" she called out. Silas appeared in the doorway of the back room, the Springfield still in his left hand, his broken right hand still tucked against his stomach. He looked at Rowan and something moved in his face. "In the morning," Eleanor said, "I need you to ride to Millerton." "My hand—" "Wade will go with you. I need a doctor, and I need the marshal, and I need to find out whether there is an addendum filed with the county recorder, and if there is, I need to be standing in that office when it opens Monday morning." She looked at Silas, not with warmth. She was not there yet, and she was honest enough with herself to know she might not get there for a long time, if ever. But she looked at him with something that was clear and direct, and without the complicated murk of the last 11 months. "Can you do those 3 things?" Silas looked at her for a moment. Then he looked down at his broken hand. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She turned back to Rowan. "You'll sleep in the back room tonight. I'll be at the front." "Eleanor," he said. "You have a bullet in you," she said. "You'll sleep in the back room." He looked at her with an expression she could not fully decode. There were too many things in it, or possibly just one thing she didn't have a name for yet. "All right," he said. She left him there and went through the house. She checked each window and the front door and the south window that had no shutter now, which she blocked with the sideboard pushed back into place. She checked the man Silas had knocked down, who turned out to be semi-conscious and non-threatening in the immediate term, and she and Wade dragged him to the root cellar and put him in it with considerably less ceremony than they had used with her brothers, and Wade bolted the door. She went to the south exterior wall and put her hand against the logs and felt the heat still in them from the fire, cooler now but present, the memory of burning stored in the wood. The exterior surface was charred for a section about 3 feet wide and 2 feet high, but the interior logs were intact. The house had held. She stood there for a moment with her hand on the logs. The first gray of morning was beginning at the eastern tree line, not yet light, but the first illusion of dark, the sky beginning to separate itself from the mountains. A bird somewhere in the east trees made a single sound and stopped. She was still standing there when she heard Rose's voice in the yard. She spun. She had the shotgun. She had not put it down all night, she realized. It was still in her hands. And she came around the south corner of the house with it raised. Calder Rowe was in the yard on foot. No horse. She had heard him leave on horseback, and he had come back on foot, which meant he had left the horse somewhere on the south road and come back through the meadow grass. And she had not heard him, and that frightened her more than anything that had happened tonight, because it meant he had planned for the possibility of tonight failing before tonight had even started. He was not armed. Both hands visible at his sides, the neat wool coat dark with dew from the meadow grass. He looked at the shotgun leveled at him, and then at Eleanor's face, and his expression was the same as it had been on her porch that afternoon, patient, absolutely certain of his position in the world. "Miss Ashcroft," he said, "you have 5 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't fire this weapon," she said. "Because I have a copy of the addendum," he said. "Harold Ashcroft's secondary title filing, signed and witnessed. The original is with my attorney in Billings. A duplicate is in the county recorder's office in Millerton, and I have a 3rd copy in my coat pocket." He paused. "I'm going to reach into my coat and produce it. Please don't shoot me." "I'll decide about shooting you after I see what's in your hand," she said. He reached slowly into his coat and produced a folded document and held it out toward her. She did not lower the shotgun and she did not move toward him. "Set it on the ground," she said. He bent and set it on the ground. "Step back," she said. He stepped back. She moved forward and crouched and picked up the document without taking her eyes off him for more than the half second it took to locate the paper on the ground, and she straightened and looked at it. The handwriting on the outside, the filing notation, the county recorder's stamp, all of it was in order. All of it looked genuine, and she had seen enough of her father's legal documents over the years to have a sense of what genuine looked like. She read the interior. The addendum was real. She knew it was real the way you know certain things when you have no desire to know them, with a cold, full-body certainty that arrived before the mind finished processing what the eyes had taken in. Harold Ashcroft, 6 weeks before his death, had added Silas Mercer as secondary title holder to the Bitterroot Valley Ranch. The signature was her father's, and she knew her father's signature in the same way she knew the sound of his voice or the smell of his coat. Bone deep, unambiguous. She stood in the gray pre-dawn of her yard with her father's secondary signature in her hand and the shotgun in her other hand and called her Roe 10 feet in front of her. And she understood with complete clarity why he had come back on foot and why he had been patient all evening and why a man with 8 armed men had needed a different kind of weapon for the last move. "He didn't tell me," she said. She said it to the document, not to Roe. "I don't imagine he found it easy," Roe said. And for once the patience in his voice was not infuriating. It sounded, briefly, like something human. She looked up at him. "Why?" she said. "Why did he add Silas?" "I didn't know your father," Roe said. "But in my experience, men who are dying sometimes do things that are about what they feel they owe rather than what is strictly fair." He paused. "He may have felt he owed your brother something, even if your brother had not earned it." She was quiet for a moment. "The offer," she said, "is it still on the table?" "It is," Roe said. 35,000, today." 45,000, she said. The patience in his face shifted in a way she had not seen it shift before. Something that might have been surprise, and under the surprise, something that might have been a very particular kind of respect, the kind one negotiator extends to another when they realize the person across the table is not who they assumed. "That's a significant increase," he said. "You have dead and injured men in my yard and a charred section on my south wall and a man inside this house with a bullet in him who's going to need a doctor, and I would argue that the inconvenience cost you something," Eleanor said. 45,000. "And the railroad pays for the doctor in Millerton and pays for the repair of this house and provides written documentation that the right-of-way acquisition is complete and there are no further claims against this property or against me personally." Rose studied her in the growing light. "You have no leverage," he said. "The addendum gives us the transfer with Silas's signature alone." "Silas isn't going to sign it," she said. "You don't know." "I know my brother," she said. "And I know that you coming back here alone in the dark to show me a document instead of waiting for Monday morning and filing the transfer with Silas's coerced signature means that you are not entirely certain Silas will sign. Otherwise, you'd have waited." She held the document out toward him. 45,000, all conditions I stated, and you take your men and your document and your railroad business, and you leave this valley, and you don't come back. Calder Rowe looked at the document in her extended hand. He looked at Eleanor's face. He looked at the shotgun, which she still had leveled at him, and to his credit he did not appear to find this an unreasonable situation. He was quiet for a long moment. "I need to make a wire to Billings," he said. "I don't have authorization above 40. "Then make your wire," she said. "You can do it from Millerton. I'll have an answer by Monday morning." He took the document from her hand. He folded it carefully and put it back in his coat. "You'll have my answer by Sunday noon," he said. He turned and walked back toward the south meadow the way he had come, unhurried, the wet grass darkening his trouser cuffs. And Eleanor watched him until the meadow grass closed around him and the gray morning swallowed him completely. She stood in the yard alone. Her hands were shaking now. Both of them. The one with the shotgun and the one without, and she let them shake because there was no longer any particular reason not to. The morning light was coming in properly now, the eastern sky going from gray to the pale gold that preceded the actual sun, and the valley around the house was beginning to define itself out of the dark. The tree lines, the fence rows, the barn, the low rise at the south end of the yard where Tate had been. She walked to the south rise. Jude Tate was there, on the ground on the east side of the old water barrel. He was not dead. She could see that from 10 feet away, the slight movement of his chest. But he was not going anywhere either, his repeating rifle on the ground 3 feet from his outstretched hand. She looked at the rifle and then at Tate, and then she picked up the rifle and carried it back toward the house, because leaving a loaded repeating rifle within reach of an incapacitated man seemed like the kind of decision she was done making. She went back inside. Rowan was awake, propped against the back room wall with the Henry across his lap, because of course he was. "You went outside alone," he said. "Ro came back," she said. "I heard voices." He looked at her. What did he want? She sat down in the chair across from him, the old ladder-back chair that had been in the back room since her childhood, the one her father had used when he sat and mended tack in the evenings. She sat in it and set the shotgun on the floor beside her and looked at Rowan. "He wanted to finish what he started," she said, "and I gave him an alternative, which was $45,000, she said, "for the right-of-way. Legal, clean, and final." Rowan looked at her steadily. "That's a lot of money." "It's my land," she said, and the phrase had a different weight in her mouth now than it had the night before, or perhaps it had always had this weight, and she hadn't been carrying it fully until tonight. "I can sell the right-of-way to the railroad and still own what I own, what my father built. They get their route for the northern spur, and I get the capital to do what I've been trying to do alone for 11 months. She paused. "It's not the same as giving them the land." "No," Rowan said. "It's not." "My father signed an addendum before he died," she said, "adding Silas to the title. He didn't tell me." She looked at her hands in her lap. "I've been angry at Silas and Wade for 11 months for coming after what wasn't theirs, and my father gave Silas a piece of it without telling me." She was quiet. "I don't know what to do with that yet." Rowan said nothing for a moment. He had a way of receiving difficult information without immediately trying to fix it, which she was finding was a quality she had not encountered much in other people and could not entirely account for. "You don't have to do anything with it yet," he said. She looked at him. His color was not good. He was pale in the lamplight, and the left side of his shirt was dark with dried blood through the bandaging, and he had a bullet in him that needed to come out before infection set in, and he was sitting against her back room wall with his rifle across his lap, looking at her with eyes that were clear and direct, and without anything in them that required her to perform a version of herself she did not have the energy for. "The marshal will be here by afternoon," she said, "if Silas and Wade ride at first light." "They'll ride at first light," he said. "How do you know?" He thought about it. "Because Silas hit that man with the rifle," he said. "That's not the action of someone who's still weighing his options. That's a decision that was already made." She considered this. It seemed, on reflection, correct. Outside, the sun broke over the eastern ridge, and the first real light of morning came through the south window, through the gap where the shutter was gone, and lay across the back room floor in a rectangle of pale gold. And Eleanor sat in her father's chair in that light and thought about $45,000 and a railroad right-of-way and a man she had known for less than 24 hours who was bleeding quietly against her wall and was the reason both of them were alive to sit in any light at all. She thought about her father, who had built this house and worked this land and loved her in the complicated way of men who are better at keeping things than at saying them, who had apparently tried at the end to reconcile two obligations that could not be fully reconciled, and who had not quite managed to tell her any of it before he ran out of time. She thought about the $45,000 and what it could build, and she thought very quietly, in the back of her mind where she was not yet ready to examine it directly, about the look on Rowan Blackridge's face when he had said, "It's your land," the plainness of it, the absence of any agenda in it, the way it had sounded like the most obvious fact in the world rather than a concession or a courtesy. She would need to think about that separately, later when there was time. When the marshal had come and the doctor had come and Rowe had sent his answer from Billings, and the men in the yard had been accounted for and the south wall had been assessed and the root cellar had been emptied of the man they'd put in it and approximately 40 other things had been dealt with. "Try to sleep," she said to Rowan. "I'm not going to sleep," he said. "I know," she said. "Try anyway. Silas and Wade rode out before full sunrise. Eleanor watched them from the porch. Silas on the glossy black horse with his broken hand wrapped in a strip of cloth she had torn from the same supply she'd used on Rowan. Wade on the brown mare that looked less tired now that the night was over and the morning had arrived with its particular honesty. They rode side by side down the south road without looking back, and she watched them until the road curved east around the cottonwood stand and they disappeared, and then she stood on the porch alone for another minute, listening to the silence the valley made after a night like that one. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a place that had been through something and was still in the process of absorbing it. The barn smelled of frightened cattle. The south wall of the house had a charred section she could see clearly in the morning light, blacker than the weathered gray of the surrounding logs, a mark that was going to be visible for years. 3 men from Rowe's crew were tied in the yard. The 2 who had come through the front door and the man she and Wade had put in the root cellar, who had turned out to have a broken collarbone from the fall and was consequently very cooperative about being moved. 2 others were somewhere in the east tree line, and she could not yet determine whether they were going to be a problem or whether they were the kind of men who, when the person paying them left the premises, became someone else's concern entirely. Jude Tate was in the root cellar. That had been Rowan's decision, made from the backroom floor at first light when Eleanor had described Tate's condition on the south rise. "He needs to stay somewhere controlled until the marshal gets here," he had said. "A man like Tate, if he can walk, he'll walk." She had asked how she was supposed to get an injured man with a repeating rifle's range of skills into a root cellar by herself, and Rowan had said, "Take the Remington and be direct about your intentions." And she had done exactly that. And Tate, who had a bullet wound in his right thigh and a general air of a man reconsidering his professional choices, had gone into the root cellar without requiring further persuasion. She went back inside. Rowan was where she had left him, against the backroom wall, but he had shifted position in the hour she'd been in and out of the house, and she could see from the new angle that the shifting had cost him. His face had the gray undertone that pain produces when a person has been managing it without relief for too long. "I'm going to heat water," she said. "You don't need to—" "I'm heating water," she said, not unkindly but without room for negotiation. "For the wound, the binding needs to come off and it needs to be cleaned properly before you get a fever, which you're going to get if we wait much longer." He looked at her for a moment. "You've done this before." "On cattle," she said. He absorbed this. "Good enough," he said. She heated water on the kitchen stove, the fire she had not built that morning before her brothers arrived, the fire she was building now in the ordinary morning quiet, and she brought it through in the cast-iron pot with clean cloth and the small bottle of carbolic she kept in the medical box for exactly this kind of situation, though she had never expected this kind of situation to involve a man rather than a calf with a wire wound. She unwrapped the binding carefully, and he did not make a sound, which she had expected, and when the wound was uncovered, she looked at it honestly for the first time in proper light. It was bad enough. Not the worst thing she had imagined in the dark hours before dawn, but bad enough. The bullet had entered cleanly, but the surrounding tissue was angry and swollen, and the early signs of what she recognized as infection beginning its work were present. The heat in the skin around the entry, the particular color at the edges of the wound. She cleaned it as thoroughly as she knew how, and rebandaged it with fresh cloth and carbolic. And when she was done, she sat back and looked at Rowan's face. He was looking at the ceiling. "The doctor's going to need to go in for the bullet," she said. "I know. Today, not tomorrow." "I know, Eleanor." The use of her name in that tone, not impatient, just plain, just her name as a fact, did something small and unexpected in her chest. She ignored it. There were practical things to attend to, and she was going to attend to them. She made coffee because coffee was a thing she could make, and making it was something her hands could do while her mind worked through the list of what still needed to happen before this day was anything close to finished. The list was considerable. She made it anyway and brought a cup through to Rowan and set it on the floor beside him, and he looked at it for a moment like a man who has forgotten that the world sometimes produces small, ordinary gestures, and then picked it up. "Tell me about the railroad offer," he said. "The $45,000. She sat in the ladder-back chair and wrapped both hands around her own cup. "Right-of-way only," she said. "A strip 60 feet wide across the south meadow and the eastern edge of the property. They get to run track across it. I keep the land. And the addendum, Silas's claim. If Roe accepts the terms, the transfer agreement supersedes the contested addendum, she said. His lawyer confirmed that was possible when he was trying to negotiate me downward yesterday. He said it without realizing it was useful to me. She paused. A voluntary right-of-way sale from the primary title holder, me, clears the railroad's legal path without needing to resolve the secondary title dispute at all. Silas's claim becomes irrelevant to them because they don't need the full deed, just the right-of-way. Rowan drank his coffee. Your father? Yes. Are you going to contest the addendum regardless, even after Rose settled? She had been thinking about this since the moment she had stood in the yard with the document in her hand and the gray morning coming in around her. It was not a simple thought. It had layers that she kept finding new ones to, the way you find rooms in a house you thought you knew completely. Harold Ashcroft was a man who felt things deeply and expressed them badly, she said. He built this ranch, and he loved it, and he loved me, but he was not always precise about showing either of those things. When he was dying, I think he had two obligations that he couldn't reconcile. He had left Silas something in his heart, a feeling that Silas had been shortchanged by life, even though Silas left of his own choosing. And he had built this ranch with the intention that it would pass to me, because I was the one who had stayed. She looked at her coffee. He filed the addendum 6 weeks before he died, and he never told me. I've thought about why he didn't tell me, and I've come up with 3 possible reasons, and none of them are comfortable. Do you want to say them out loud? Rowan said. Or are you telling me you've thought about them? She almost smiled. It was a near thing. I'm telling you I've thought about them. I'm not ready to say them out loud yet. Fair enough, he said. But I'm not going to contest the addendum in court, she said. Even if Roe's deal makes it irrelevant to the railroad, the addendum is still a legal document. Silas is still technically a secondary title holder, and I can't spend the next 10 years fighting my brother over whether my father was in his right mind when he filed it. She paused. Harold Ashcroft was in his right mind. He was diminished physically, but his mind was his until the end. I'm not going to stand in front of a judge and argue otherwise because it's convenient. Rowan said nothing. He was listening in the way he had, the full attention way, nothing in his face that was waiting for her to finish so he could say his own thing. What I'm going to do, Eleanor said, is talk to Silas when this is over. When the marshal has come and the legal pieces are settled and his hand is set properly and he's had enough time to think about what he did and what he tried to do and where the line between those things sits. She looked up from her coffee. I don't know what that conversation will produce. I don't know if Silas is capable of the kind of change that would make him a person I want to have an ongoing relationship with. But I'm going to give him the chance to try, because my father apparently believed he deserved one, and I am trying to believe that my father knew something I don't. Rowan looked at her steadily. That's harder than anything you did last night, he said. I know, she said. Don't tell me it's admirable. I'm doing it because it's right, not because it feels good. I wasn't going to call it admirable, he said. I was going to say it takes longer to heal from than a bullet wound. She looked at him. Are you speaking from experience? I have a brother, he said. Had, possibly. I haven't seen him in 9 years. She waited. He looked at his coffee cup and seemed to decide that the trade was fair. She had said her difficult thing. He could say his. He wasn't wrong about everything he accused me of, Rowan said. That's the part I spent the first 3 years on the ridge trying not to think about. A man who is only wrong is easy to be angry at. A man who is half right is considerably harder to put down and walk away from. She understood this in her body before she understood it in her mind. She sat with it for a moment. You should write to him, she said. Maybe, Rowan said. Which, from Rowan Blackridge, she was beginning to understand was not the dismissal it would be from another person, but something closer to an actual maybe. A door not closed. A thing being considered by a man who considered things slowly and meant what he arrived at. The marshal arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon. His name was Aldous Crane, and he was not the marshal Eleanor had expected. Not the weathered frontier archetype, but a thin man of about 50 with reading spectacles pushed up on his forehead and the general appearance of someone who spent more time with paperwork than with pistols, which turned out to be accurate and also, as the afternoon demonstrated, not a disadvantage. He arrived with 2 deputies and a doctor named Fielding, who was younger than Eleanor had hoped, and more competent than his age suggested, and behind them, to Eleanor's considerable surprise, Silas and Wade rode in, having apparently encountered the marshal's party on the South Road and turned back to accompany them. Silas had not been required to return. She noted this without comment. Dr. Fielding went to Rowan first. Eleanor showed him through to the back room and stood in the doorway while the doctor made his assessment, and she watched Rowan's face while the doctor worked and found herself aware of an investment in the outcome that was larger than she would have predicted 24 hours ago. Fielding confirmed the bullet needed to come out, which everyone had known, and said the infection was in early stages, which was manageable, and asked Eleanor if she had any whiskey, which she did, a bottle her father had kept in the cabinet above the fireplace and which she had not touched in 11 months. She got the whiskey. While Fielding worked, Eleanor dealt with Marshal Crane on the porch. Crane was a man who listened without performing the act of listening, which she appreciated. He heard her account of the previous 24 hours with his spectacles back on his nose and a small notebook in his hand, and he asked questions that were precise and useful, and he did not once express surprise at anything she told him, which she took as either great professional equanimity or long experience with what people were capable of, or both. "The deed situation," he said, when she had finished. "The addendum your brother filed, the secondary title." "Harold Ashcroft filed it," she corrected. "My brother didn't file it. My father did." Crane looked at her over his spectacles. "The addendum your father filed," he said, without missing a beat. "Have you had legal counsel look at it?" "I've had one night to look at it," she said. "No. There's an attorney in Millerton, woman named Coburn, Clara Coburn. She handles property cases mostly. I'd suggest you see her before Monday morning, before the recorder's office opens." He paused. "If Roe accepts your terms on the right-of-way sale, the addendum may not matter to the railroad, but it still matters to your title clarity. You want that settled." "Can Silas dispute the primary title?" Eleanor asked directly. Crane thought about it in the way of a man who has looked at enough property disputes to have a working knowledge that stopped just short of legal advice. "The addendum adds him as secondary holder," he said. "It doesn't remove you as primary. In territorial law, that means he has a claim to a share of proceeds or inheritance, but it doesn't give him the right to sell without your consent or to override your ownership decisions." He closed the notebook. "Coburn will tell you better than I can." She filed that away. Crane's deputies took charge of the men in the yard and the root cellar with the quiet efficiency of people who had performed this kind of collection before. Tate was brought out of the root cellar, and his wound was looked at by Fielding before Fielding went back to Rowan, and Tate said nothing during this process, which Eleanor thought was the most intelligent thing he had done since arriving in her valley. The 2 men from the east tree line had, as she had suspected, elected to become someone else's concern. They were gone. No sign of them in the trees when the deputies checked. Crane noted this and said it was not unusual and moved on without visible frustration. Roe's wire arrived at 4 in the afternoon. Silas brought it from town. He had ridden back down to Millerton while the marshal was conducting his business, saying only that he had a thing to do, and Eleanor had let him go because she was beginning to cautiously accept that Silas's internal recalibration, whatever had produced it when he swung the Springfield at that man in her front room, appeared to be genuine if incomplete. He came back with the wire and handed it to her on the porch without reading it, or at least without appearing to have read it, which with Silas she could not be entirely certain about. She read it. Pacific Northern Railroad accepted her terms. $45,000 for a 60-foot right-of-way easement across the southern and eastern edges of the Bitterroot Valley property. Medical and repair costs to be covered by the company. A legal representative would arrive Thursday with the formal easement agreement for signature. A bank draft in the amount of $45,000 would accompany the representative. She stood on the porch and read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her dress pocket. Wade was sitting on the porch steps. He had been sitting there for the better part of an hour, not doing anything particular, just sitting, which was the most honestly purposeless she had ever seen Wade in her life. He looked at her face. "Good news?" he said. "Adequate news," she said, "which is better than I had yesterday morning." He nodded. He turned back toward the yard where the marshal's deputies were loading the last of the bound men onto horses. He was quiet for a moment, and Eleanor stood beside him and waited, because she could tell he had something that was working its way toward the surface, and she was not going to make it harder by asking. "I knew it was wrong," Wade said. "Before we came here, I knew it." "Yes," she said. "That doesn't fix anything." "No," she said. He looked up at her. His dark eyes, their mother's eyes, had something in them she did not see there often. Not guilt exactly. Guilt was too simple and too self-focused. This was something that faced outward instead of inward. Something that acknowledged her specifically, her losses and her labor and her 11 months alone, rather than his own discomfort at having contributed to them. "I'd like to make it right," he said. "I don't know if you want that, or if you think it's possible. I'm not asking you to decide today." Eleanor looked at her younger brother on her porch steps in the afternoon light in the valley her father had built, on the land that was hers and that was going to stay hers, and she thought about what it cost a person to say a true thing when the true thing reflected badly on them. She had not done it often herself without it costing something considerable. "Not today," she said, "but not never." He nodded. That was enough for now. It was enough for both of them. She went back inside. Fielding had finished with Rowan. The bullet was out, sitting in a small tin dish on the side table like a terrible artifact, and Rowan was pale in the way of a man who had been through a significant procedure without enough whiskey to adequately obscure it, but he was present and coherent, and the wound was properly cleaned and dressed. Fielding told Eleanor the infection risk over the next 3 days, what to watch for, what to do if the fever went past a certain point, and she listened to all of it and retained all of it because she retained things that mattered. Fielding asked if Rowan had someone to look after him. Rowan started to say something. "Yes," Eleanor said. Fielding left at 5, riding back toward Millerton with Crane and the deputies and the collected remnants of Calder Row's crew. The yard was quiet. The cattle in the barn had settled. The afternoon light was moving in the particular way it moved in the valley in September, going amber and long, the kind of light that made even a charred patch on a south wall look like something that could be repaired. Eleanor stood in the backroom doorway and looked at Rowan. He was going to be able to walk in a few days, Fielding had said. He could sit up without significant pain within the week if the infection resolved. He would have a scar, which was going to be there regardless. He would need to rest, which was the instruction Eleanor anticipated the most resistance to, and she was already composing her position on this internally. "You don't have to stay," Rowan said. She looked at him. "This is my house." "I meant—" He stopped. "I know what it's like when someone makes a decision about your situation without your input." "Are you asking if I want you here?" she said. He met her eyes. "Yes." She leaned her shoulder against the doorframe. Outside the back window, the meadow was going gold, and a crow was working the fence line at the south end of the yard, indifferent to everything that had happened in this place in the last 18 hours. Life reasserting its ordinary patterns. Eleanor watched the crow for a moment. "Last year," she said, "in February, I lost a calf to the cold. A heifer calf I'd been watching for 3 days, the smallest of a late litter, the one I'd been hoping would make it. I buried her myself in the east pasture, and then I came inside and I sat at the kitchen table and I thought, there is no one on this earth who knows that calf existed, no one who saw her or cared whether she lived, and when I'm gone there will be no record of it anywhere." She paused. "That was the loneliest I've ever been." Rowan was quiet. "So no," she said, "I don't want you to leave, but I want you to understand that what I'm asking you to stay for is not a small thing that I'm offering. It is an actual life. Seasons and hard winters and cattle dying and fences coming down and all of it. I am not asking you to rescue something. I'm asking you to be part of something that is already here and already mine and already real." He looked at her for a long time. "I've been on that ridge for 3 years," he said, "and in that time I have gotten very good at surviving and very bad at living. I know the difference now. I didn't always." He shifted against the wall, carefully, accounting for the bandaged side. "What you're describing, seasons and hard winters, that doesn't scare me. What scares me is that I might not be as useful to you as you deserve.
I might not know how to be a person people rely on. I haven't been that in a while. I'm not looking for someone I can rely on, Eleanor said. I've been reliable enough for myself for 11 months. What I'm looking for, she thought about how to say it and decided to just say it plainly the way Rowan said most things, is someone worth being reliable for. That's different. He absorbed this the way he absorbed most things she said, with a completeness that felt like being actually heard rather than processed. All right, he said. All right, she said. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no sweep of music in it, no perfect symmetry. He was pale and bandaged on her backroom floor. She had gunpowder in her hair and a tear in her left cuff she still hadn't trimmed, and her father's document, the one she had not been expecting, folded in her dress pocket beside Rose's wire. They were two imperfect and somewhat battered people in a room that smelled of carbolic and old smoke, and the thing they had arrived at was not a conclusion but a beginning, which is to say, it had all the uncertainty and none of the neatness of an ending. She pulled the ladder-back chair close and sat. Outside, the light was shifting again, the crow gone now from the fence line, the meadow grass moving in the first cool breath of evening coming down off the ridge. Eleanor looked out the window at the ridge, at the high tree line where Rowan had been running his trap line yesterday morning, a morning that now felt very far away, a morning before this. And she thought about distances, about how far a sound could travel when conditions were right, about the very specific set of circumstances that had brought a scream up through the pines to a man who had been trying not to be reachable. Clara Coburn's office was on the main street in Millerton, between the dry goods store and the land office, and Eleanor found it on Monday morning without difficulty. She had ridden in alone, leaving Rowan in the back room with strict instructions and the Remington on the floor beside him, which he had objected to on the grounds that he was not an invalid, and she had pointed out that invalid was not the relevant category, and that the relevant category was man with a bullet hole who had been told to rest, and she had left before the discussion could continue. Coburn was a woman of about 60, gray-haired and direct, with the particular manner of someone who had been practicing in a territory where women property owners were uncommon and had long since stopped adjusting her approach based on how surprised people were to see her. She read the primary deed, the addendum, and Rose's right-of-way agreement in order and without comment, and then she set them on the desk and looked at Eleanor. "Your primary title is solid," she said. "The addendum adds Silas Mercer as secondary holder, which in territorial law gives him a claim to a proportional share of any sale proceeds and a voice in major property decisions. But it does not give him independent authority to sell, transfer, or encumber the property against your will. You are still the controlling owner." "And the right-of-way agreement," Eleanor said. "As primary title holder, you have the authority to grant an easement without Silas's consent, provided it does not constitute a full sale of the property." Coburn tapped the row agreement. "This is an easement. It is not a sale. You can sign it." "What do I owe Silas?" Eleanor said. "In practical terms, if I sell the right-of-way for $45,000. Coburn looked at her steadily. "Legally, nothing immediate. The addendum specifies his claim in the event of a full property sale. An easement sale doesn't trigger that clause." She paused. "What you do beyond what's legally required is your own business." Eleanor thought about this for a moment. "Set aside the legal minimum," she said. "What would you do?" Coburn looked at her with the kind of look that happens between two women who have both been managing things that other people assumed they couldn't manage, and who recognize the particular intelligence this produces. "I'd give him something," she said. "Not because he's owed it and not because he earned it, because you're going to have to live next to this decision for the rest of your life. And living next to a decision you're at peace with is cheaper in the long run than being technically correct." Eleanor signed the easement agreement on Thursday, in the presence of Rose's lawyer, who was a cautious young man from Billings who clearly had not been told the full details of what his employer's men had attempted, and who appeared to find the signed easement agreement, the bandaged man visible through the backroom doorway, and the charred patch on the south exterior wall a collectively puzzling combination. She did not explain it. The bank draft was for $45,000. She held it for a long moment after the lawyer left, this piece of paper that represented more money than she had seen in her entire life combined, and then she put it in the iron box on the fireplace shelf, not behind the loose brick,
not under the floorboard, just on the shelf where it could be reached without hiding it, and she went to make supper. In the weeks that followed, the valley did what valleys do. The mornings came cold and the afternoons went gold, and the cattle grew winter coats and the creek ran clear past the east pasture where Eleanor had finally repaired the fence line. The south wall was re-chinked by a man from town who did it properly and charged fairly, and when it was done the new chinking was lighter than the old surrounding it, an obvious patch, and Eleanor decided she was not going to try to make it match. The mark was there. It had happened. She was not a person who needed to pretend otherwise. Rowan healed. Not cleanly. The infection ran its course over 8 difficult days, during which his fever climbed high enough on the third night that Eleanor did not sleep, sitting in the ladder-back chair watching the quality of his breathing. But it resolved, and the wound closed, and by the 3rd week of October he was on his feet and helping with the morning chores without being asked, which she noted and did not comment on because commenting on it would have made it something to discuss, and she preferred it to simply be something that happened. He was not good at being cared for. She had expected this. He had strong opinions about how things should be done that were not always her opinions, and they argued about this on a Tuesday morning over the water trough repair in a way that was genuinely unpleasant for approximately 10 minutes, and was then resolved by the only method available, which was that they were both too practical to sustain a disagreement about water trough technique for longer than it took to establish that both methods actually worked, and that Eleanor's was marginally more efficient in cold temperatures. He left his traps on the ridge. They went up together in late October, Rowan moving carefully on the steeper sections, Eleanor ahead of him and not making a thing of being ahead of him, and brought the equipment down and stored it in the barn. The winter camp he had kept up there, a small lean-to structure with a good wood stove, he left standing. She asked him why, and he said it was useful to have a shelter above the tree line in bad weather, and she agreed, and that was the end of it. She wrote to Clara Coburn in November about the addendum, and Silas, and Coburn drew up a document that carved a 10% share of the easement proceeds, $4,500, into a separate account in Silas's name, contingent on his signing a formal acknowledgement of Eleanor's primary title authority over all remaining property decisions. She sent the document to Silas in Billings through the mail. He signed it and sent it back. There was no note with it, just the signed document. She put it with the other papers in the iron box and sat with the fact of it for an evening, and then moved on because you move on, because moving on is not the same as forgetting, and is not the same as forgiving, and is not the same as pretending it didn't happen. It is simply moving, which is the only direction available. Wade wrote to her in December, an actual letter, 2 pages in his cramped handwriting, which she read at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning with coffee. He had found work in Helena with a surveying outfit, he said, legitimate work, the kind where he used the skills he actually had rather than the ones he had been trying to manufacture. He asked if she was well. He did not ask if she had forgiven him, which she took as a sign of growth, of understanding that that was not something you asked for, you waited to see if it arrived. She wrote back, 3 paragraphs. She told him about the south wall repair, about the cattle count going into winter, about the Henry rifle Rowan had hung over the front door, and the ongoing debate about whether that was practical or superstitious. She signed it Eleanor, and then she went and made more coffee and thought about her father, as she often did, and about the complicated math of what we owe the people who made us, and whether the owing can survive the ways they fell short. There was no clean answer to this. She had stopped looking for one. What she had instead was a morning in December, cold and clear, the valley floor dusted with the first real snow, the mountains to the north white to the tree line, and the sky above them the particular blue that only exists at altitude in winter. She was on the porch with her coffee and her coat and her father's land around her, and Rowan came out of the barn and crossed the yard and came up the porch steps and stood beside her with his own coffee, and they looked at the valley together without talking because they had gotten good enough at being in the same place that they did not always need to fill it. She thought about what it cost to stay, the actual cost, the full accounting of it, the 11 months alone, the night that had tried to take everything, the document she had not been prepared for, the complicated truth of her father's divided loyalties. None of it was resolved in the way stories are supposed to resolve, with all the threads tied off and all the accounts settled. Silas's hand had healed crooked. The doctor in Millerton had done what he could, but the fractures had been complex and the healing was imperfect, and he would carry the mark of that morning in the kitchen for the rest of his life, which was, Eleanor thought, as appropriate as most things get. The crow was back on the fence line, the same crow or a different one, pulling at something in the snow at the base of the post. The cattle moved into the pasture in their slow winter way, steam rising from their backs in the cold air. Harold Ashcroft had built this ranch from nothing, had worked 30 years into the soil of this valley, and had loved it, and had loved his daughter in the way of men who are better at building than at speaking, who pour into the work what they cannot find the words for. He had made mistakes in the accounting of his obligations, as people do, as Eleanor herself would certainly do, as everyone eventually does when the obligations of a whole life press against each other, and something has to give somewhere. She was not going to be her father. She was not going to be the story her brothers had needed her to be, the woman whose ownership was temporary and conditional, the person who could be pressed to the floor and made to sign something. She was not going to be that. She had not been that even when the pressure was greatest. She had been herself, imperfect, not particularly graceful, sometimes running entirely on the stubbornness of someone who has nothing left but the refusal to stop, but herself. That was enough. That was, in the final accounting, the only thing she had to offer and the only thing that had ever mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Rowan said. "My father," she said. He nodded. He understood that this was not an invitation to say anything, and he did not say anything, and they stood together on the porch in the December cold and the blue mountain light, and the crow worked at the fence post, and the snow held the shape of the valley and the south wall of the house. Behind them carried its repaired patch that did not quite match the rest. Some marks stay. Some marks are the record of what you survived. Eleanor Ashcroft had learned to tell the difference, and she had learned, at considerable cost and over a longer period than she would have chosen, that the record of surviving is not something to hide. She finished her coffee. There was work to do.